Right, let's get started here. A few more people sitting down. Welcome to School of Visual Arts and welcome to the Design Criticism Department. Nice to see you. And actually welcome to the final lecture in our full series. It's been a really excellent series, even if I do say so myself. I think we've really had some really great lectures. And if there are any on this list that you think you'd be interested in and that you've missed, I recommend you go to our website. We have videos of pretty much all of them posted there, and you might like to have a look. And while you're there, you can find out more about the program and apply. It's very easy to do, and you can find all kinds of information on the website. And if you are actually interested, do come talk to me afterwards. These are the vital statistics. And I want to thank you for braving the elements to join us tonight. And thanks also for taking a break from buying all those creative, wooden, progressive holiday toys for the kids in your life to come to a lecture about how we first got into buying all those creative, wooden, progressive toys for the kids in our lives. I hope you'll stay after the lecture for our festive holiday drinks party, where amongst other celebrationary announcements, we'll be raising a glass to our second year students who've just survived a full day of thesis work in progress presentations, and for alums in the group, you know what they've just been through. It's a really significant milestone in the development of their thesis projects, and I'm happy to say they are right on track with some really amazing research. And here are some of the topics that they are investigating. One is looking at the role of design in the branding of the emerging nation of South Sudan, which is an absolutely fascinating case study available to her through first-hand research. One is looking at the design of contemporary urban surf culture, and this is a spread from a magazine called Wax, which typifies this sort of new growth, I suppose, of a modern-day countercultural design aesthetic. Sandra is looking at the confusion of culture and commerce that occurs in this kind of the nexus of fashion curation in museums. This is from the Alexander McQueen exhibition at the Met, which is one of her case studies. Another student's looking at the human body as the site and material of design interventions, and it leads to some really creepy stuff, let me tell you. And Anna Marie is looking at the role of tiny houses in contributing to, and these are houses that are less than 300 foot, and I believe this one is only 150 square foot. The role that these houses might play in contributing to solutions to various urban housing crises. Just a sampling for you. All fascinating topics which are really sort of, I think adding to our growing body of really interesting research topics being developed here at Decrit. But because we're a design criticism program and deal mostly with aspects of contemporary design, we deal with a peculiar challenge, and that's trying to develop an approach and a set of methods that are particular to design criticism. We engage with all the same research methods and concerns that kind of prevail across other disciplines, but we also have to do something a little extra, and as the students know, that's no small challenge. Being trained as a design historian myself, I'm quite sensitive to the differences and similarities, these kind of points of tension between historical research and the kinds of research that underlie criticism. We often have to work with material that is still in the very process of being produced. There's no luxury of hindsight or sort of temporal distance. It's being formed under our noses. We have to make our own archives. We have to critique the work of the very people who we're interviewing and who are actually giving us access to the work. It can often lead to very sort of tense and interesting situations. So I think in today's presentations, we've been wondering about, as well, how to sort of maintain a design lens when we're looking at such a broad field of sort of issues, social, political issues, but also, sort of verging into the territory of many other disciplines. How do we keep the design lens focused through those studies? We wonder about the differences between design history, design criticism, and material culture. We wonder about how historical phenomena shape current conditions and how we might critically interpret historical material. So these are just the things that spin off of our discussions today. And luckily, we have the perfect person here to answer just such questions for us and probably raise many more. Amy Ogata is a professor at the Bard Graduate Center of Decorative Arts, Design History, and Material Culture here in New York. Her research explores the history of modern European and American architecture, design, and decorative arts, as well as things like World's Fairs and the material culture of childhood, which we'll be delving into tonight. Her book, Designing the Creative Child, Playthings and Places in Midcentury America, which is published by University of Minnesota Press, which does quite elegant-looking academic design books, actually. I was really impressed. It was published earlier this year, and her new book just come out. She just handed me a copy, actually, with an essay on the graphic and toy designer Fredun Shapur has just come out. So I guess let's get to work and to play. Amy Ogata.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here tonight on a slushy, cold December evening when I'm sure there are many other things you'd rather be doing. But it's a pleasure to see you all here, and I look forward to having a conversation with you about some of this material, maybe some of these questions that you've raised about design criticism, design history, material culture, and the ways in which these things are intertwined and overlap, I think, in really interesting and provocative ways. In 1943, Arnold Gesell, the influential 20th century pediatrician and child development psychologist, claimed that, quote, by nature, the child was a creative artist of sorts. We may well be amazed at his resourcefulness, his extraordinary capacity for original activity, inventions, and discovery, unquote. Such awe at the child's apparently innate creativity has its roots in the Romantic era, and has not only persisted, but also expanded in our own age. Indeed, authentically creative children have become an unquestioned truth. But why do we view children as having unusual insight or creative ability? Why do we believe that classes, toys, books, furniture might help to stimulate this particular quality? And furthermore, why has creativity itself become so important to a sense of national pride and positive future gains? I want to explore how objects and spaces designed for the surge of American baby boom children born after World War II embodied, perpetuated, and transformed the idea of childhood creativity and gave it a fundamentally material form. I argue that the educational toys, public amusements, the plan and decoration of the smaller middle-class house, public post-war schools, and special museums developed across the country were designed to cultivate an idealized, imaginative child. The dramatic rise in the US birth rate between 1946 and 1964 thrust debates about raising and educating children into the public eye, and questions about nurturing individuality acquired broad political significance. These years coincided with US policy on containment, an anti-communist political doctrine that had wide-reaching effects on daily life. As Cold War anxieties seeped into post-war narratives of domesticity, creating creative children and nurturing imagination, particularly through sensory engagement, became one of the unexamined discourses of the post-war era. I want to begin with the concept of Anschauung, the notion of the early 19th century Swiss educator Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi. Anschauung has been translated into English as sense impression, and then subsequently as object lesson. Pestalozzi argued that in learning we move from words to things, or from things to words. He favored the latter, an educational process that introduced the object before the word. The material world and our sensory impressions of it was for Pestalozzi and those who extended his argument a fundamental source of knowledge. The idea that objects might release not only a child's understanding, but also a forceful creativity was a central theme for subsequent reformers. Friedrich Froebel's kindergarten theory, a system of learning based on manipulating objects in a very specific sequence, as you can see this is gift number 5, aimed to foster what he called the impulse to creative activity, to achieve a comprehensive expression of love and humanity. This lasted well beyond the 19th century and became firmly embedded in mass-produced goods for children and the discourse of hands-on learning through objects. And you can see this in one of these Froebel gifts that was created in the US. And its 1950s version by Play School, which was no longer at all attached to any kind of theoretical model. It was an amusement. Creative insight, creative insight was persistently linked with the romantic ideal of sensory encounter with the material world. And this became a widespread value in post-war America, where the notion of creativity was recast for Cold War uses. In thinking of creativity historically, rather than in essentialist terms, I hope to show how it acquired not only particularly a material image, but also how it became an enduring cultural value. In official government rhetoric, in popular culture, and in the reflections of private families, having children was vaunted as a personal reward and as a civic duty in post-war America. Along with the huge numbers of baby boom children born to American parents, a rise in wages, mass consumption, and the expansion of middle-class values put new emphasis on raising better children. Correct parenting then became a weapon against war, delinquency, and communism. As middle-class, predominantly white families took up this challenge in the prosperous years after the end of the war, their dollars were increasingly directed towards children's needs: more personal space, increased opportunities for play, and an unprecedented number of personal belongings, such as books and toys. Middle-class parents were unabashed in their aim to provide correct amusements for their children. The ideal of the object lesson was given new relevance as the psychologists Jean Piaget and Erik Erikson popularized the notion that children learned in stages and through play. Piaget argued that through play, children acquired not only motor skills, but also cognitive ability. After the war, the educational toy companies that were first established during the interwar period enlarged the range of goods for nursery schools and home use. Play School, which became the largest producer of educational toys in the US by the late 1950s, had always relied on promises of raising better children, but the tone of these assurances changed from practical manipulation in the 1920s to a new emphasis on personality, citizenship, and creativity in the years after World War II. Play School sponsored ads promising creative play and even advertised a hammer and nail set with the slogan, "Creative Pounding." One reason that toy makers embraced creativity was to encourage toy sales year-round. An ad in Playthings, the magazine of the toy industry, proclaimed, "When a toy is designed to make the most of a child's natural creativeness, you gain an unlimited selling market." The Maple Scaniatalis train set was unpainted, and the differentiation between the engine, caboose, and tanker was indicated in generalized forms. Play School argued that it would put no adult limits on a child's imagination. The market for creative toys and educational object lessons grew along with the baby boom. In addition to the established toy companies, small manufacturers also made amusements that promised to improve creativity. Magnet Master was the design of the Chicago architect Arthur Carrara and Daniel S. Deffenbacher, who was then the director of the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. It was a kit of brightly painted steel plates in the shapes of circles, triangles, rectangles, squares, with long and short rods, compact geometric Alnico magnets, and a base plate, all packaged in a lemon yellow box. Its colorful planes were perforated for building with rods and magnets, allowing an infinite variety of forms. The Walker Art Center called Magnet Master, as you can see on the box here, a new creative toy, and claimed that it taught principles of building, composition, and design. There were no diagrams for children to follow because, as the enclosed pamphlet suggested, children are naturally imaginative and will derive greater pleasure and benefit when left to their own images and devices. A promotional article in Look magazine in February 1949, this is the image on your right, showed the painter Max Weber playing with Magnet Master alongside an 11-year-old boy, suggesting that through play, the child could understand principles of building and composition. Museum officials even conducted test studies on children at a local elementary school to adapt it for their museum education programs. Magnet Master debuted in 1948 at the Walker Art Center's Children's Fair as a museum-wide extension of their everyday art gallery. It was initially sold through art museums and select design shops, and eventually in department stores nationwide. This is a cardboard display that's designed to sit on a counter, and you can see that the magnets are attached with these chains so that the customer could potentially manipulate these things while they were trying to figure out if they wanted to buy it. And since it was quite expensive, counter staff was encouraged to sell it as playroom equipment, stressing that Magnet Master was an investment in the home and the child. Design historians have recognized that Walker's everyday art gallery, like MoMA's good design programs, played up formal beauty and good taste in ordinary objects. Yet the message of Magnet Master was that play could not only instill aesthetic values, but that it could liberate a child's creative impulse. The paper toys designed by Charles and Ray Eames make a similar claim. The toy, the house of cards, and the coloring toy were all designed, and at around exactly the same time, to enhance, but not to instruct. A note to parents stated, quote, "The coloring toy does not presume to make artists out of children or to teach them how to play. Children are far ahead of us on both counts," unquote. The cultural ethos of play pervaded experimental architectural circles, especially after the 1950 translation into English of Johann Huizinga's book, Homo Ludens. Other designers, such as the Seattle architect Fred Bassetti, began to design toys for both their own children and for manufacture. Bassetti's flexagons were cardboard forms bound together with rubber bands to form a nearly infinite variety of three-dimensional shapes. The ideal of creative play was evident in the name of a new manufacturer, Creative Playthings, which packaged and sold progressive educational theory to ambitious middle-class parents. Creative Playthings developed a variety of toys, from building forms they called hollow block in the late 40s, to an abstract plywood rocking horse designed in the early 1960s. Like Walker's Magnet Master, Creative Playthings gained a reputation for promoting good design as well as educational creative play. In 1954, the company commissioned the Swiss sculptor and toy maker Antonio Vitali to design a series of wooden play forms, favoring smooth, undulating, unpainted surfaces that form to a child's hand. Vitali's toys reinforce the association between visual abstraction, tactile appeal, and imaginative development. By eliminating details such as facial features or separate parts, Vitali's designs put the aesthetic and intellectual emphasis on the form and the natural grain of the wood. Creative Playthings founders Frank Kaplan and Bernard Barinholtz, who are both former teachers, followed psychologists and pediatricians of the era who believed that providing children with unpainted and vague forms would stimulate the child's imagination. Abstract shapes and natural textures and colors trumped realistic detail. Educational toy manufacturers such as Play School and Creative Playthings promoted the idea of childhood as a fleeting opportunity to learn lifelong lessons. The idea of childhood creativity was posed against the current state of American adulthood. David Riesman's The Lonely Crowd and William H. White's Organization Man, two sociological portraits of the post-war era that achieved popular success, condemned the conformity of middle-class culture. For White, the Organization Man was a figure who stood for the transience and mindlessness of the American corporate employee in all aspects of work, family, and social life. Creativity was the casualty that White lamented most in the dominance of the organization. He argued that groups were not creative and that those who promoted the group, especially the administrator, possessed a, quote, natural distaste of the non-creative man for the creative. Similarly, Riesman's outer-directed individual defined himself in relationship to others and the group. In an other-directed society, Riesman's hope for individual expression lay in cultivating an informed opinion and personal consumer choices. Imagination and creativity were the qualities that he and others admiringly ascribed to the potential for individual self-expression. The belief that conformity was a negative, even dangerous quality made it central to the cultural politics of the post-war era. Describing the pressures to adhere to a set of behavioral prescriptions, this literature elevated the ideal of creativity as conformity's antidote, giving it new prestige in the debates on childhood, consumption, and social values. Studies on creativity became a significant area of research at precisely this moment of Cold War fear and social critique. Already in 1948, Alex F. Osborne, an advertising executive who coined the term brainstorming, worried, quote, "Our basic danger is that liberty will breed laxity and that apathy will sap the creative power of our people. What can be done to offset that danger? This question is a challenge not only to educators, but to every American," unquote. In 1950, J.P. Guilford spoke on creativity in his inaugural address as president of the American Psychological Association. He argued that creativity was once neglected by psychologists, but was quickly becoming a highly desirable economic value and government interest. Guilford's work stimulated a dramatic expansion in creativity research in the late 1950s and early 60s. With support from the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Air Force, and major industrial enterprises and universities, creativity research quickly doubled and tripled every few years in the post-war era, peaking in the mid-1960s. One prominent theme was how to preserve the seemingly innate creativity of childhood. Harold H. Anderson of Michigan State University argued, quote, "Creativity was in each one of us as a small child. In children, creativity is universal. Among adults, it is almost non-existent. The great question is, what has happened to this enormous and universal human resource? This is the question of the age," unquote. As scientists studied childhood creativity, they discovered that it did not correlate with conventional measurements of intelligence. Aptitude researchers such as E. Paul Torrance and Jacob W. Getzels argued that creativity was overlooked amid the obsession with IQ testing. These scientists stressed the value of creativity in learning and in later life. Widely read magazines such as this article in Look, which was published in 1961, publicized some of this research. Quoting Torrance, Look suggested, "The future of our civilization, our very survival, depends upon the creative thinking of our next generation," unquote. Thus, creativity was popularly understood as life-sustaining rather than narrowly artistic. Parents Magazine, for example, promised both practical and psychological benefits as a result of creative play. In 1950, the magazine suggested that encouraging creativity would give parents freedom because children would learn to amuse themselves. A 1968 article suggested that in allowing children unfettered expression, there is every good assurance that they will become skilled and happy people. In the early 1960s, at around the height of American creativity research, the U.S. Children's Bureau, which is today part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, but at this time was an independent and very powerful wing, issued A Creative Life for Your Children by the anthropologist Margaret Mead. Mead interpreted creativity as a child's way of understanding and contributing to society. She suggested that it is, quote, "a chance for every child to make a part of the world he sees. It means giving children a chance to do in play as they grow the kind of thing that is done by poets and landscape architects, scientists, and statesmen to such a superb degree," unquote. Mead saw creativity as both personal and social and urged parents to give children space to make things, but she also argued that to develop creativity, children needed privacy. Mead's vision of childhood was bound to the everyday goods and spaces of the American family. She argued that since the U.S. was a democracy, children were considered individuals from birth and were therefore given furniture and goods fitted to their own size. Cribs, chairs, special bowls, and cups all created what she called a child-sized world out of the corner of the room. The making of a child-sized world in the home was the ongoing project of post-war middle-class parents who labored to meet the expectations of a popular culture increasingly obsessed with family life. While 19th century middle-class children had large upstairs bedrooms or playrooms, in the small post-war houses, kids took their place at the center of the dwelling. A spate of new houses such as these, which were designed with children's needs in mind, had playrooms that were clearly marked on the plans. Let me just point them out to you here. This is a playroom, right next to the bedrooms. And another one here, this is a playroom, again, not far from the bedroom, but actually within view of the kitchen. And this is an important, this one too. This is a retractable wall, but the idea is that surveillance is possible. In Marcel Breuer's 1949 exhibition house for the Museum of Modern Art, built on a lot adjacent to the museum's garden, the playroom was one of the house's most admired aspects. Conceived as a, quote, moderately priced house fitted to the requirements of a typical American family, unquote, Breuer's idealistic vision of post-war domesticity included a large open area for children contiguous to the kitchen and the outdoors and furnished with toys from creative playthings. So this is the playroom right here. This is the patio. And there's a little window here, perhaps you can see, where you can actually, the person in the kitchen can see what's going on in here. The fictional children in the house in the museum garden were expected to spend their time on creative pursuits. On the wall was a carpentry set. In the foreground is a loom, or building their imaginations with the unpainted Scaniatalis train set and Magna Master, which is partially assembled on the table. The house in the museum garden received unprecedented publicity and nearly 100,000 visitors in the 6 months that it was open. A questionnaire survey conducted at the time revealed that visitors' favorite rooms were the central kitchen and the children's playroom, which both received an 84% approval. The playroom promised to cultivate imagination through solitary play, and it dovetailed with the growing power of commercial toy manufacturers. In 1947, Joseph Aronson, an architect and writer, was commissioned to design a series of model playrooms for the American Toy Institute, a research wing of the toy manufacturers of the USA. Aronson's first model playroom was billed as a practical, low-cost play space in which some 100 toys could be rationally stored. The room included built-in shelves, a climbing stair, play table, desk, and a pull-down cabinet for storing model train sets. Aronson's design made the ordinary bedroom into a multi-level indoor playground with places to hide, drawn walls, and hang up artwork. He advised parents to decorate carefully, arguing, quote, whatever pattern a child sees every day, he will tend to copy, to the detriment of his own creative development. Plans for at-home carpenters were included in the free pamphlet that the toy industry issued. Aronson's model playrooms idealized both children's play and middle-class parents, who were expected to enable correct stimulation, provide numerous toys, spend leisure time doing accomplished carpentry. Beyond modeling creativity at home, parents were urged to provide privacy and space for their children. Psychologists argued that children would develop a greater sense of emotional security and aesthetic appreciation in spaces devised with their interests and personality in mind. In their checklist of every child's needs, parents listed creative play equipment to stimulate his physical and mental growth. Marianne Besser, who examined the bedrooms of the Science Talent Search winners in the late 50s, this is the competition that preceded the Intel Science competition, posed this issue in stark post-Sputnik terms, quote, how many children lose interest in science and other creative fields because of overly tidy mothers or noise-hating fathers? We will never know, but we do know that when curiosity and enthusiasm are hampered by an unfriendly environment, inspiration withers. Norman Cherner, who was then an industrial arts teacher at Teachers College, published his own designs for toys, equipment, and children's rooms in 1958. He argued that the furnishing of the dwelling had a central role in raising the child, and he admonished the parents, Peter can very well serve as an incentive for a parent to plan a more effective home for all those who live in it, a home conducive to well-balanced and creative living. This ideal of creative living for both parents and children resulted in a vast number of possible do-it-yourself projects. Books and guides with plans for children's amusements proliferated. Sunset Magazine on the West Coast culled projects they had published into freestanding guides. At the same time children gained more space in the family house, they also acquired their own miniature dwellings. Unlike the elite playhouses of the 19th century, which had running water and working kitchens, Postwar playhouses were uniquely for pretend. Experts championed the playhouse's potential for stimulating imagination. Called A House Full of Play, A Room Full of Imagination for Any Child, the post-war playhouse took many forms. One of the simplest was a covered card table. Patterns, such as this one with a circus theme, were available from Ladies' Home Journal. Plastic covers by Doughboy came in large and small ranch houses, and a model available from FAO Schwartz and other retailers gave girls a chance to live in a colonial while boys played in a firehouse. More elaborate designs abounded. FAO also sold a deluxe log cabin, which they promised was without equal for active, creative, and social play. A complex gingerbread house in Parents Magazine required custom-cut pine siding and leaded windows. Dr. Spock's advice to parents who couldn't buy a playhouse was to provide packing materials, such as a cardboard appliance box. By the early 1970s, Creative Playthings had developed a ready-made cardboard house with a pitched roof and movable doors and windows. Experts stress the importance of different types of play for a child's healthy personality. The ideas of developmental science thoroughly permeated the toy catalog. Fredun Shapur, the consulting art director for Creative Playthings in the early 70s, created these images of types of play: active, social, dramatic, community, etc., translating developmental psychology into a striking visual imagery. Cultivating childhood creativity was firmly hitched to play and the home play spaces of the child's earliest years of life. Yet even public spaces, such as playgrounds, schools, and museums, were undergoing a dramatic transformation in the name of encouraging playful exploration and creativity. In the early 1950s, Creative Playthings added a new division of the company called Play Sculptures. This wing produced playground equipment designed by artists and industrial designers to rethink the physical landscape of play. Egon Müller-Nielsen's helical slide was a model for playground equipment, modern playground equipment. Unlike conventional jungle gyms, slides, or swings, the mountain-like structure evoked free forms that encouraged exercise and fantasy. Play Sculpture produced a series of playground schemes that relied on a single unit that could be repeated to create a striking visual environment. And they emphasized that children could explore shape and texture, inventing their own games in the recessed and hidden spaces. By the mid-1960s, sculptural playgrounds were in vogue as part of urban renewal projects. Richard Datner's Adventure Playground for Central Park in New York City was a complex landscape of free play with mounds, tunnels, slides, and different textures of wood, granite, and water. In 1958, following the launch of the Soviet space satellite Sputnik, the U.S. government passed far-reaching legislation and with unprecedented funds for school buildings and equipment, as well as curriculum development in science, mathematics, and foreign languages in order to win what Senator William Benton of Connecticut had already called a Cold War of classrooms. The rise in the national birth rate and lack of construction during the Depression and population shifts created an urgent need for thousands of new schools across the country. Wartime production and experiments substantially changed the technical standard of American schools. The availability of inexpensive steel for framing, glass for expansive window walls, and better lighting all contributed to a redesign of the school. Yet many of these schools also reflected an ongoing romanticism around the concept of school as a place of self-discovery. While educational progressivism is widely assumed to have died in the 1950s, under this kind of Cold War tension, schools of the period tell a more complicated story. Designed with more space for children's projects in and outside of the classroom, many post-war schools embrace the child's sensory experience. The Heathcote Elementary School, a 1953 project of Perkins and Will in Scarsdale, derived from the ideal of immersing children in nature. With hexagonal classrooms grouped in fours, the Heathcote plan was likened by the architects to an image of children under a tree. The unconventional classroom shapes at Heathcote were devised in opposition to the traditional rectangular box. Instead of wood and iron desks bolted to the floor in straight rows, classrooms had plywood tables and lightweight chairs that could be moved. Benches built next to the plate glass enhanced the child's proximity to the wooded area and provided informal space for class projects. and the long corridors that connected the classroom clusters to the administrative center were glazed and set with jewel-tone panes that invited children to look out onto the rambling landscape, to ponder and experiment on their way down the hall. Scarsdale was one of the richest towns in the U.S. in the early 50s, but even poorer communities explored similar ideas. Donald Barthelme's West Columbia Elementary School in Brazoria County, Texas, was built around the same time as Heathcote. Planned around open-air courts, West Columbia's plan used the metaphor of the neighborhood to save the expense of corridors. The exposed steel frame and expansive plate glass windows allowed children to see each other across the play space. Classrooms were skylit with a system of louvers to control glare and temperature. Exposed beams, open bar joists, and pipes were all left unconcealed in the classroom and public areas as a measure of economy. But Vermont marble slabs were mounted to the steel frame to serve as a deliberate adornment. Praised for economy and forthright structure, West Columbia also gained attention for its sensitivity to the child's experience. Progressive educational values that emphasize the role of the individual in the community were reified in these structures. In addition to experiments on fatigue, luminosity, and airflow, which had been carried out during the war, architects paid close attention to color, furniture, and materials to create spaces that welcome the child. One study argued that the school plant designed for the child is unpretentious, open, colorful, and planned so that he or she could blow off steam and breathe fresh air, kick the walls, open the doors without a struggle. The prevailing belief that younger children needed a home-like environment encouraged fireplaces, large windows, curtains, and movable furniture in the classrooms. Furniture was one of the key signifiers of the physical and pedagogical change in American schools. Lightweight tables and movable chairs, such as those Brunswick manufactured in plywood and fiberglass and a colorful hard plastic, were widely recommended because they could be moved into small groups and stacked when not in use. Public schools attracted new scrutiny as Americans put more stock in education to further national values. Popular skepticism over progressive ideas increased in the early 50s. As Cold War tensions rose, the school was in a paradoxical position. Despite the demise of its professional association, progressive education lingered in American schools. Educational reformers, psychologists, and architects embraced its core values of individuality and creativity. Scientific research on creativity was central to some of these national discussions. Educational psychologists wrote shorter articles for publications that reached school administrators and teachers, in addition to guides and pamphlets synthesizing this research, which appeared in the late 50s and throughout the 1960s. Since research consistently showed that teachers were more apt to favor the well-behaved conformist pupil over the impulsive imaginative one, the national teachers' unions published pamphlets such as these for the AFT and the NEA, which digested the voluminous scholarship on creativity and offered teachers hints for identifying creative behavior and ideas for encouraging it in their classrooms. But this discourse went well beyond classroom management, as educators and architects sought environmental and material means to put the curriculum into action. Educational Facilities Laboratories, or EFL, this is a division or a program of the Ford Foundation, spent over $25 million toward redesigning American education. EFL brought together educators, architects, manufacturers, and government officials, all responsible for school building, to encourage ideas about both curriculum and architecture, and to put emphasis on developing schools that reflected curricular innovations. In the mid-1960s and 70s, EFL strenuously promoted open school designs. Instead of boxy classrooms with bilateral lighting, open schools were large spaces with few walls and a luminous ceiling. The open schools sought to encourage team teaching, individualized instruction, or using film and television requiring temporarily larger or smaller areas. In Caddo Rolett Scott's PS 219 in Queens, developed with EFL money in 1966, 4 classrooms are housed within a carpeted shell structure, allowing students to move freely among 5 teachers. Under the dome, the low dividers created 4 classrooms that could be combined into a single space with 4 outdoor courts to enhance team teaching. According to EFL, quote, Old walls should not stifle new ideas. Identical boxes must not enforce the same program on all students and teachers. Each is a unique individual. Fixed furnishings must not quash spontaneous inquiry. Dismal, spiritless, and uniform decors must not blight a child's creativity. Of course, new spaces did not necessarily mean that teachers enacted these pedagogical ideas. Yet, if elementary school architecture only appeared to encourage creativity as an educational value, art instruction after World War II fully assimilated creativity into the curriculum. Creative art education programs cultivated children's skills at depicting and describing their own feelings and experiences. Instead of following prescribed steps or copying historical sources, creative art education prized children's emotions and natural abilities at expressing them. Like educational toys and post-war schools, creative art education had deep roots in progressive educational practices of the pre-war era. However, creative art education was so dominant after World War II that it became the general term for all art activities. Victor Lowenfeld, a Viennese refugee from Nazi Europe, profoundly encouraged this trend. In his 1947 book, Creative and Mental Growth, Lowenfeld spoke directly to teachers, offering them a tool for understanding child development through art. And you can see that he included these charts, which may be hard to read here, but up here he has emotional growth, and then he's going down the list, and down here at the bottom it says creative growth. So these are all kind of ways of diagnosing where the child is psychologically through the kinds of art that he or she is making. Whereas drawing for industrial or applied uses dominated in 19th century school arts, using art therapeutically to examine and develop a healthy, democratic personality was one of Lowenfeld's main concerns. For Lowenfeld, independent creative work not only allowed for emotional release, it also developed self-confidence and fostered what he considered naturally democratic tendencies in children. Copying exercises and coloring books were examples of damaging conformity and submissiveness, whereas free drawings or paintings from the imagination or immediate experience were considered a healthy outlet for the child's emotions. And this, he reproduced a study, it was done not by him, by someone else, that showed how children drew birds, and then they were shown this kind of convention of the bird as a kind of V, and after that, children drew their birds like Vs. And on the right, of course, is the opposite, the thing that he was really aiming for, which is this kind of unfettered, personal expression. Lowenfeld saw art as a way to develop creativity that would be useful in other aspects of daily life. He noted, quote, "If Johnny grows up and through his aesthetic experiences has become a more creative person who will apply it to his living and to his profession, one of the main aims of art education will have been fulfilled." The Binney and Smith Company was especially invested in promoting the image of creative art education. As the makers of Crayola crayons and other products, Binney and Smith sold materials to both the home and school markets. By the 1970s, the company claimed some 70% of the American crayon market. Beyond crayons, the company expanded its line of products after the war, offering modeling clay and finger paint, both of which became ubiquitous materials in post-war art education. Binney and Smith cultivated the school market with publications and free guided workshops for teachers. Print ads in family magazines targeted a home market. In these, the company idealized childhood creativity by using children's drawings and paintings as evidence of innocent, imaginative play. And a 1958 campaign for finger paint employed a single word: imagination. The material embodiment of the campaign to cultivate creative children extended to public institutions. Large art museums, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Art Institute of Chicago, both undertook extensive renovations in the post-war era to create separate spaces for child visitors. They also developed educational programs tailored for handling real objects. As the idea of a hands-on encounter with things gained purchase, museum educators returned to Pestalozzi's notion of the object lesson. But the case of the Children's Museum, a type begun in the late 19th century, shows how the doctrine of hands-on knowledge suited a culture that believed a playful experience could provoke new ways of thinking. The Brooklyn Children's Museum, the nation's first museum designed specifically for children, was located originally in a large residential structure. Limited space and the unstable condition of the dwelling required a major renovation and a completely new building in the 1960s. The renovated permanent space put new emphasis on learning through exploration and free play. The architectural firm Hardy Holtzman Pfeiffer, which designed the museum, made play and individual discovery part of the building's partie. By placing the new museum below ground and exposing one corner in a sunken courtyard, the firm opened the space to many levels that were not readily apparent from the street, but were gradually revealed inside. Skewing the axis, the architects used a corrugated steel culvert as a people tube, along with a flowing stream, to bisect the 3 floors. With its hidden areas, exposed structure, and mechanicals, the museum became an open-planned environment for exploration. Edwin Schlossberg, who devised the exhibits as a participatory learning environment, included a greenhouse with a soil preparation station, a ripple tank that allowed children to experiment with waves and light, a refurbished 1924 calliope powered by a blower, and an operable hydraulic lift. Other power-generating devices, such as a Nebraska windmill and a grinding stone attached to a water wheel in the people tube stream, gave children the opportunity to experiment with simple machines. Grain grown in the museum's greenhouse, for example, could be ground into flour. Creating an awareness of how and why things work was the motivation of the Brooklyn Children's Museum. In a program statement, Schlossberg noted that he aimed to move away from the push button, the lever, or the vitrine. He said, quote, "If we supported the static display case method, we would be contributing to the disassociation of people from their environment. We would be telling children that things as they are in the world today are all they can expect to have. We would be accepting the world of inevitability and passive relationship. We cannot do this." One of the most striking exhibits in the museum was a series of 3 huge labyrinthine plastic models of molecules that children could tunnel into and climb. Called Curved Space, developed by Peter J. Pierce, the structures of a diamond and protein molecule were expanded several billion times and rendered in a polycarbonate plastic on an aluminum frame. The largest section of Curved Space was 20 feet high and more than 20 feet long, and it accommodated both children and adults. Beyond the entertainment value of the structure, the climbing child was akin to a free electron moving within the diamond's molecular structure. Molecules and ripple tanks were the subjects that formed a part of a broad and reformist vision of a post-Sputnik high school science curriculum. Like the physicists and biologists who devised this new curriculum, the aim of the Brooklyn Children's Museum was not to put young children on an early path to a science profession, but rather to encourage play, experimentation, and curiosity as a means of building a knowledgeable general public. These exhibits, object lessons, if you will, stressed an unfettered exploration of objects, structures, and machines. The enthusiasm for a creative child was not just a private desire, but also a public one. The sociologist Nicholas Rose has traced the subtle alignment of institutional aims with individual pleasures and desire for self-fulfillment in the 20th century. The nexus between scientific research on creativity, the private consumption of toys and amusements, and the official educational sphere of school building, art education, and the elevation of a hands-on discovery in museums shows how the authentically creative individual self was a widely held national ideal. I want to be clear that while I explore the ways that the figure of the creative child was invented, I'm not trying to suggest that creativity is an empty notion or that children are not particularly imaginative. Instead, I'm arguing that this figure was constituted visually, materially, spatially, and scientifically. Following Bruno Latour and others, I'm trying to show how people, ideas, images, and objects, including buildings and exhibits, acted together to assemble the notion of creativity we recognize as both a metaphor and the acts of real people. The post-war discourse of creativity suited a mythologizing narrative of individualism and was tied to a competitive aim to reawaken national vitality. In considering how this idea was disseminated and consumed, I've argued that material goods and spaces participated as active agents. Against rising tensions of cultural weakness, fears of cultural weakness, creativity became a way of meeting the abstract demands of the post-war age. The things, spaces, and programs that I've discussed were all consciously designed. I want to stress an inclusive rather than exceptional role for design within the broader material culture. Some of these things were relatively elite objects created by designers or architects with an eye toward aesthetic improvement, but many were part of an everyday texture of middle-class life. They show not only that a romantic educational discourse persisted even in an era highly suspicious of originality, but also that a primal perceptual encounter with objects remains and often unspoken, but deeply embedded in our invention, understanding, and practice of modern American childhood. Today, a similar discourse is everywhere in the promotion of goods. If we believe the advertisers, both children and adults, can buy their way to creativity through consumable goods and direct downloads. Anyone can be creative with the right courses, tools, kits, books, apps, or apparel. Creativity sells products to an uneasy consumer, wary that globalization may eventually submerge individuality. Creativity is an elastic term. It can imply great works of art and the humble insights of daily life. It is difficult to define and to measure with any precision. If creativity is so abstract and so intangible, why then do we insist on its importance? Creativity appeals, I think, because it promises hope. Indeed, faith in creativity has become a reigning American value and worry. A 2010 Newsweek magazine article claimed that American creativity scores had fallen alarmingly, and that unless we boost our national creative capital, we will remain behind. Creativity has thus once again become a default answer to social and economic problems. Moreover, it suits a mythologizing national narrative of individualism, discovery, and renewal. As this ad from the toy maker Megablock suggests, we still hold that creativity will grow up and save the world. Thank you. Sure.
Well, thank you so much for that incredibly thorough and fascinating account of that period, the post-war period. But obviously, I'm sure we're all calculating our heads some of the legacies, positive and negative, of what you've been discussing. So let's start there. In fact, sort of what did happen when creativity grew up? That generation. What were some of those legacies?
Well, I think that, in some ways we can't know because we're in it, but it's also, we don't know what these things actually do. I mean, I think that we can try, and the Torrance tests for creative ability they've been renormed several times, and they are still given to children and to adults, but it's very difficult to actually measure effect, and this is one of the problems, and this is one of the issues around the word creativity, is it has these utopian promises that are really hard to get beyond that rhetoric. So in terms of what has happened and what were the effects of people who played with those toys, I'm not a social scientist, and so I really think that I can't answer that question. There are people who have suggested, however, that, in fact, the tech industry is what happened to those people.
I was thinking of basketball and ping pong and football in the workspace, this kind of thing. No,
absolutely. I mean, this rhetoric of play as a means for, finding new ideas, and yes, absolutely. That has thoroughly permeated not just children's culture, but adult culture.
Yeah, that might seem to be it. I was very interested when you started to talk at the end there about this mythologizing narrative that you're, sort of reading into what you're studying here. I wonder, were the critics in the period that you're studying of this notion of creativity and the way it was manifested in designed products?
You mean, did they see this as something specifically American? Oh, yeah, absolutely, right. So Alex F. Osborne, who is he's the O in the BBDO advertising firm. He's the one who coins the term brainstorming. He writes a whole series of books about applied creativity. And the proceeds of those books then go to fund a position at, I think it's Buffalo State University, which was one of the first institutions to have creativity classes. And these are all books that have, explanation of the benefits of creativity. And it's very, very much couched in this kind of nationalist rhetoric of improving American ingenuity. And he's got lots of opinions about where creative people live, not in cities, he thinks. It's very much bound up. He believes American creativity in particular is bound up with manifest destiny. He's quoting Oswald Spengler. I mean, it's full of this kind of very dogmatic patriotism. And he's one example. I mean, even the social scientists and psychologists are relying on some of this rhetoric around a democratic personality to try to cultivate this. So there's this very very clear Cold War fear that seeps in some cases, in very blatant ways, in other ways a little more subtly, but it's definitely present.
And was there any pushback to that by social critics of the time? I mean, were they pointing out that the way it was being used as a political tool?
No, they really weren't. Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's lots about creativity in the period. It becomes, again, one of these kind of slogan words, and very much like our own age, in fact. And so there's this creative revolution in advertising. There's like Xerox. So these big companies are also really getting behind the idea of creativity. I mean, Margaret Mead is publishing her pamphlet under the aegis of the U.S. government. So, no, there isn't a critique of that, in fact. And even the sociologists are talking about how creativity is, in fact, the antidote to conformity.
Yeah. So. I guess when you're faced with something as hard to grip onto as creativity, it's hard to critique it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's awfully easy. That's one of its problems, I'd say. Yeah.
All right, well, before we open up to questions from the first year students and others, I wonder if you could just take us behind the scenes a little bit and discuss perhaps a little of your approach as a historian. You have this incredible range of sources, which, I'd love to know a little bit more about the kinds of archives you've delved into and what problematics that may have thrown up in terms of numerous sources, but also numerous disciplines that you are kind of navigating.
Yeah, this was a project I originally started because I had a baby, and my mother pulled out all these old toys that she had saved, including a couple of these things from Creative Playthings that were manufactured in the 70s. And I started looking at these things and thought, gosh, these are really great. Who designed these things? Of course, there's nothing at this point. This is around 2000. There was really no information about this kind of stuff. And I started looking into it, and I started researching it as best I could. And so it really started from that. It started from toys. And it really started with that experience of having these things and remembering them, and wanting to know more about who made them, who sold them, what kinds of people were buying these things, from there it really grew, and I started realizing that this was something that the toy industry was one and very important aspect of disseminating some of these ideas and reflecting some of these ideas, but that these were also present in lots of other kinds of things, lots of other spaces. And so I started, and I'm originally trained as an architectural historian, so I started thinking about, what if we take the toy as a, kind of the smallest part of this, how can we grow, get to bigger, larger and larger and larger spatial contexts around some of these ideas? And so that's what I started looking at. And I looked in some really interesting archives the toy industry, which is really tricky to get at because a lot of them are private and corporate, and they're not interested in having anybody digging around their files. A lot of them are out of business. They just don't exist anymore. Museums were full of great information, actually, and I ended up doing some, lots of research in many, many different kinds of libraries, and that was actually really great. So education libraries, as well as Avery and Bobst and the libraries in New York. And I think this is a problem, and it was a bit of a surprise to me that I was suddenly having to do all of this research on psychology, and that was something that was harder than dealing with the kind of design history, which seemed kind of familiar. But I would say that because this project took a long time, and I had to dig into all these different kinds of pockets, that my ideas changed about the design part of it, and the ways in which design, the way I had thought about it initially, was pretty straightforward. And as I became more and more invested in the project and expanding it, I became really more interested not just in design by people whose names we might recognize, although those are interesting because a lot of them are designs that they're not known for, but also this kind of everyday stuff, the stuff that survives in garage sales, the kinds of things that were advertised, as just kind of the ordinary goods, and things like finger paint, which of course, is something that I hadn't thought about at all until I was working in this archive of Biddy and Smith at the Smithsonian. So, these things that kind of catch you off guard. I mean, the design history of finger paint was really not something that I had ever thought I'd be working on, but it was totally fascinating, and it is designed. And I think that is something that I feel strongly about, is that we take lots of things for granted, but they are particularly in this moment, I think, geared toward this kind of sensory encounter that was very much planned and sold and packaged with this kind of idealized image in mind.
I wonder, did you explore people's reactions to the toys? Did you talk about people's memories of their toys and get the consumer response?
I didn't, in part because it's hard to do that, and this is the thing, that this project is really about parents. It's really about people who bought the stuff rather than the people who touched it and had it and stepped on it and chewed on it and whatever. I was one of those. I'm a little late in the scope of the story. I was born in 1965, so I just missed the baby boom. But that dimension of it, this kind of what people remember about their toys, is, I think, totally fascinating. And I've taught courses where this comes up, really right away. And I've taught some other things too. And it's people are very forthright about their own toys. But it's that question about, what do people actually remember about them? Is it the smell? I mean, is that physical engagement, or is it this kind of idealized, oh, my dad gave me this when and there was this relationship to other people in their lives. And so I didn't do that. I didn't do an oral history. I did think about it, and I thought about actually talking to parents as well. But it was just that next step that I found really hard. There are a couple places in the book where I do talk about what children said. I mean, there are very few, and this is one of the big problems of childhood studies. It's the thing that bedevils people who work on the history of childhood, is getting that child's voice. And in this case, most of these children they're not writing things down in journals. Post-war journals, really hard to find. You could find 17th century journals more easily than you can find post-war journals. A lot of the stuff is just not in any institution. So researching this era, even though it seems kind of far away to us now, it was actually, it's the kind of thing that is, when I started, was really not really well known at all. So.
Imagine having to trawl the Super 8 films of all the flea markets to find your evidence.
Yeah, well, not quite. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's very illuminating. So let's open up for some questions from the first years first, and then we'll go beyond that. Okay. Susan.
I was wondering, well, you touched a little bit on it when you talked about the covered card table houses, the gender bias in toys. Was that part of your study?
No, well, yes and no. I mean, it's definitely there, and then there's the colonial and the firehouse are very clearly gendered, and the ranch houses. I mean, the playing house thing is definitely. But the thing about a lot of those ads is that it's for boys and girls, right? So they're both supposed to be playing house. And this is one of these dimensions of the story, I think, is that it is trying to I think creativity was sold not as something that girls do or that boys do, but really something that all children do. And it was really kind of used as this way of suggesting that this is a kind of authentic, sincere, natural aspect of childhood. If you look closely at the toy ads, which you may have just done, you'll notice there are a whole lot more boys playing with those things than there are girls. By the late, early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, there are toy companies like Creative Playthings that are really challenging that. So they're showing kitchens with boys in them. I mean, they're really trying to, girls building with blocks, and they're really very conscious that this is an important thing, important message to critique. But yeah, I mean, it is absolutely there. It's definitely, the rhetoric is aimed at mothers, not fathers. But I think the thing about creativity is that it's this promise, right? It is this thing that is universal. I mean, that's one of its kind of problematic qualities.
Actually, this is a good segue question from what you just said. You spoke about how creativity is sort of this, cure-all, and maybe there's some flaws in that. Do you think that today, is your opinion that maybe we're less naive to that premise that creativity may be a cure? Because I feel like we're a little bit more humorous now. I see a lot of people, mothers, they'll be like, oh, all these toys, and they want to play with like kitchen utensils and Tupperware. It seems that maybe we're more open, and also like a movie like The Real Tenenbaums and Ethelrene's book Family of Geniuses, how it's almost made make a spoof of this like forcing creativity. So I was wondering if you feel that what happened during the time you were talking about has sort of calmed down now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I did show an image of that aisle at Target, creativity toys.
Right.
It's all Play-Doh. I think, I don't know, that there's a whole lot of money in the toy industry, and I've got tons and tons of catalogs full of things that are promising all the same things. Mm-hmm. Any kind of educational toy catalog is full of these same promises and these same kinds of things. And in fact, there are some old, toys that have been reissued with some of these same promises. So I don't know. I think there are plenty of parents in the post-war period who gave their kids, pots and pans and cardboard boxes. I would, I think, yes, we are probably more critical consumers, but we're still consumers. And we are very much enamored with this idea of creativity. And I would say that I think that, in fact, one of the biggest consumers are not only parents, but also business management, right? So this cliche of thinking outside the box, this idea, there was a 2010, there was an IBM survey of CEOs around the globe, and they decided that the one management talent that they thought would enable a healthy business future is creativity. And so these are some of the kind of doctrines, I'd say, of management, business management. And I think that there's an awful lot, I think even more now, perhaps, than the stuff that I've encountered from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There's even more a kind of applied dividend. So there's like an interest in getting children to be scientists. You know, the Brooklyn Children's Museum in its older phase was really about discovering things, learning through this experience. But there are a lot of there's a lot of pressure, I think, on young children and school-age kids to become scientists, you know, rather than art historians, or design historians or design critics or whatever it is. But you know, I think that this is a real, I think, particularly after the recession, that the idea of creativity is one that's about making money. And it's definitely true at places like Google, and it's definitely true at, you know, in this kind of realm of management. It's definitely true, I think, on a certain level, maybe not for you and your friends, but maybe for other people, of wanting children to have access to something that is going to stimulate that part of the brain that will go on to be productive.
Hi, do you have a sense of how different, how the toys, the so-called creative toys have changed since it came about? Are they still the same kind of things that are being sold today?
Some of them are the same. As I said, there's some old things that were brought out and reissued. In fact, some of Fredun Shapur's stuff has never been out of. It's always been, a lot of his things were issued through Neff in Switzerland, and some of those are still on the market. And there's a whole new series of puzzles that are being reissued right now. But there are things. There are toys that are devised by the MIT Media Lab, in fact, that have, by people who are associated with MIT, that have found their way into the commercial market and are very much embracing some of these same ideas of building, experimenting, connecting, just using different kinds of materials, plastic and snap together joints rather than magnets.
It's more like an update of the same ideas.
I think there are many of the same ideas. I wouldn't say they're entirely the same. I don't know what the playhouse market is like these days, but I do see a whole lot of those plastic Tyco playhouses around. Not in the city, but in other places. So I think that there's a certain type of toy that has persisted. And it was not particularly new, I would say, even in the 1950s and 60s. It had a much older, longer legacy. So building toys, construction sets, these are the kinds of things that were absolutely ordinary, household amusements in the late 19th century. And they have continued, then transformed into magnets, or then transformed into something else, plastic joints. But it's the same kind of genre of learning through making and building.
Did you look at all at the extent to which something like makeup or writing code or robotics have sort of, I guess just sort of an extension of those?
Yeah, I think that there certainly is that. There's this program that MIT developed called Scratch, which is a kind of kit for building, almost Lego-like, animated for writing code, essentially, without having to write code. You just snap together these little pieces, and you can make animations and do all kinds of things on the computer screen. This is something it's not particularly, I remember the date, but it's not new now, but it's used in public schools, it's used in, but people use it. It's widely available, it's available for free on the internet. So, yeah, so that absolutely is part of it.
Creativity within prescribed limits?
Well, but this is one of the tensions of this idea, is that it seems to be all about free play and exploration, and this is, all the big notion, but in fact, these are very specific kinds of creativity that we expect from children.
And use these parts in this room.
In this room, at this time, and be quiet, right, and solitary, indoor, right, exactly. And I think that's one of these issues, is that, even creative pounding, right, supposedly was creative, but, what actually is going on in that toy. And I think that, this is one of the problems, or one of the issues around creativity, is that we have certain expectations, and they are largely a kind of positive view of creativity. It's not the destructive creativity that I think many parents might well be aware of, that children are entirely capable of. But that's not the thing that this discourse promotes. It's really the making, the building,
I think I've seen real creativity. Any last questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering if you could comment a bit about what I see, and maybe you can expand on my limited view, the sort of moment in design history and art history, even of this focus on the material culture of childhood. Just looking at the sort of spate of recent exhibitions like Century of Childhood MoMA, various exhibitions of building toys at the CCA in Montreal, or the National Building Museum. Just sort of wondering where this interest comes from, and is it sort of a recent phenomenon, or does it itself have a longer history?
Oh, it does have a longer history. There are institutions like the Strong Museum in Rochester, which has kind of rebranded itself as a children's museum now, but was originally a collection of Margaret Woodbury Strong, and was full of toys. And they had all kinds of exhibitions, late 70s, early 80s, around their collection. And then there were a couple of exhibitions. There were exhibitions of educational toys, again, late 70s, one or two. There were also, and this is one aspect of this, is that a lot of these museums that had junior museums had their own little exhibitions, and often of toys, and they're often in November and December. And so there's this, when do these shows come up? They tend to, coincide somehow with, the shopping season. And so there was in fact an AFA show that was circulated, that was organized by somebody at Walker, of wooden toys from around the world, or something like that, in the early 70s. So there have been toy exhibitions. I think that's true. There is a recent fascination with childhood and with material culture of children. And to what we might just ascribe that, I have some ideas, but I wouldn't want to say specifically. But there is, I think, tremendous nostalgia for this particular moment in time, this kind of baby boom era. And there is a tremendous awareness of design, a kind of design literate population that sees these things, with an eye of admiration. And the same thing is true of mid-century furniture and a whole variety of other things, jewelry, clothes. But it's, and I would say that this is kind of an extension of that. But I think that there's also a literature around the history of childhood, a scholarly literature that starts probably in the late 60s, mid-60s, and then gets slightly larger, and then gets exponentially larger from the 90s to 2010 or so. That's really this bulge of interest, not just in who children were, how they survived, how they lived, but also what they had. And just I would say that coincides very neatly with the discipline of material culture and the study of material culture and design history. So I think these things are very much intertwined.
All right, well, I think I would like to invite you all to come and sample some yellow cubes of cheese and some red spheres of wine next door.
But before we do that, please join me in thanking once again Amy Ogata.
Thanks.